Boardroom Bound, episode 128, The Keys to Adding Value and Building a Board Portfolio with Anna Dutra.
When you become a director, you are steering, you are asking the right questions, but you are not running the day-to-day business. And if you are not comfortable with that, then you're going to suffer quite a bit as a board director.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give aspiring and existing directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. In today's episode, we're speaking with Anna Dutra. She's a global C-level executive seasoned at many companies and now has many more board experiences beyond that. Current count, I think she's got about 14 board roles. So 8 normal boards, if you want to think about that, 2 advisory boards, 4 nonprofits, several public company boards. And this is exactly the kind of person who's been there and done it, has so many great insights to share with us. Before we jump into today's show, I'd like to share a message from our sponsor about director certification. Want to join your first board, or are you looking for additional board seat opportunities? In either scenario, be sure to be disciplined in your approach. Now, through the Becoming an Exceptional Board Director Candidate Coaching and Certification course, you get both modern board director candidate packaging and modern board operations knowledge integrated within one program. Remember, the key to landing additional or your first board seat is in your packaging. Make the effort to do it right. Program graduates also receive their globally recognized International Board Director Competency Designation upon course completion. It's designed for individuals and groups. You can learn more at bit.ly/IBDC-D. That's bit.ly, bit.ly/IBCDC-D. And now let's jump into the show. Anna Dutra, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, this is something that I have been looking forward to, and you and I were joking about this before we started today, was that we were together at an event for 2021 on boards way back in November. It feels like so long ago, the way the world has changed. So it's great to be talking with you today, bringing all of the insights that I've heard to our audience. And of course, the way the world has changed, the story's changed, including you were joking with me before how many more board seats you've been able to get onto today. So I'm excited to share with the audience what that means. But first, I would love for people to understand a bit of your sort of corporate background experience, because that impressive resume, I'm sure, in many ways is what allowed you to be the successful board member you are today. So how did your career trajectory begin before you got up into the board space?
Well, Alex, first of all, it is a pleasure to be here with you. And starting with my upbringing, nothing in my life was linear. I am born and raised in Brazil, but spent a lot of my summers and my vacations in Argentina. Went to study law and economics because I wanted to be a diplomat, and then shadowed a diplomat doing a base and realized that was not what I wanted to do. At that point, IBM was recruiting in Brazil. And I applied. I knew nothing about technology, but I guaranteed to the person who was interviewing me that I would be the best technologist in his team in 6 months. He said, hired, and I'm going to put you in sales. So I started at IBM in the sales program, which for those who recall, in the 80s was fantastic. And I'm too grateful for the education I received from IBM. I then, in 1990, a colleague of mine walked into my office and said, I just came to say goodbye. I'm moving to the United States. And I said, to what? And he said, well, I just got into my MBA program. I'm going to UCLA. And at that point, my only reaction was, what is an MBA? And by the time he was done explaining, I knew I wanted one of those too. So that's how I ended up coming to the U.S. I came to Kellogg first for a couple of years only, and just never left. My husband's a surgeon, and he came to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and all our children were born and raised in the Chicago area. My career in the U.S. after that was split between consulting and then running companies in the professional services and technology space with, from a consulting perspective, a lot of focus on certain industries like CPG, food and beverage, retail, energy. And then even the type of businesses that I ran, they ranged from strategy consulting to technology consulting to then organizational culture leadership consulting. I worked for a number of different companies, which gave me a very broad experience from small privately held boutiques to giant public companies like Accenture. And in my three last roles, I ran a global practice for Accenture, which gave me the P&L experience. Then I moved on to be the CEO of Korn Ferry Consulting, where not only I was a proxy officer on a global public company, but also I had the acquisition, the M&A experience as well. Acquired 8 companies in 7 years. And then my last stint was as the CEO of the Executive Club in Chicago. At that point, I realized that, number one, I was in that been there, done that space, had done most of what I wanted to do, and it was time to start to, 1, pay it forward, 2, have more flexibility, and 3, create my own portfolio career. And that's when I started to join boards. I always served on not-for-profit and foundation boards my entire career. But as I was a proxy officer for Korn Ferry, I did not do public company boards. So then I started to join boards and join a variety of different boards and advisory boards. And now I do a lot of board work, advisory work, teaching and speaking and mentoring as well. So that's my career in a nutshell. Moved to Florida. My husband just retired. We have 3 wonderful daughters who are all young adults and independent and living all over the place. And we have 3 dogs that we love too.
So, Anna, we blazed through all of that there, and I'm sure we'll come back to lots of it, but let's take the transition point from, say, being an executive into the board space. So you teed that up well, that you had restriction while you were at Korn Ferry, unable to do it, but it sounds like it was already beginning to bubble over in your mind that this is probably something that interests me. You'd already been doing, say, some nonprofits, but wanted to move into compensated seats. Let's share with our audience what that process was like for you when you realized, okay, that is something I want to go and achieve. What did it actually look and feel like for you to go and do that and make that happen from being a dream to being a reality?
So, Alex, one thing that I always say is that a board career is a career like any other, right? You cannot expect to never have served on any board and think that you are equipped to join a public company board. So my first board was actually the PTA of my children's TV school, and quite frankly, I learned a lot there. You learn a lot about committees and chairing committees and board processes and bylaws, which I had no clue what they were before joining that board, and so on and so forth. Then you start to join more complex, more high-profile, non-for-profit boards, then maybe you move into an advisory board or start to just be a board member in a startup or in a VC, where very likely you won't even be paid, but it's a different type of experience. Then the small private companies come up, more complex private companies come up, and then you are equipped to apply or to be a candidate for a public company board. The other thing I always say is that board work is not for everyone, right? You mentioned my experience as a corporate officer, as an operator, and then as a board member. I lost count of the number of people who walk into the boardroom as a director with the same operating mentality that they had when they were executives in corporations. And it is a big disaster because those are very different roles, require a different type of demeanor. In one case, you are running the business. You are ultimately making all the day-to-day decisions. You are, when necessary, getting in the weeds. When you become a director, you are steering, you are asking the right questions, you are advising, but you are not running the day-to-day business. And if you are not comfortable with that, then you're going to suffer quite a bit as a board director. So those are my initial thoughts. I'll be happy to elaborate on any area that you'd like.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
It does. In many ways on this show, we're fond of saying nose in, fingers out. And it is a big change for someone who probably got successful by doing things and making them happen to being in the boardroom and having a very different remit for what you've got to go through. And Anna, I imagine part of some of these board roles came about because of your existing network, people that already knew you and respected you and perhaps knew the right people to connect you to. Can you give us a sense of perhaps what it looked and feels like? Sometimes on this show, we talk about how a big part of it is sharing with your existing network who you are, what you're ready to do, why you're a good fit for it, and what you want to do in case they see something that comes up. Can you talk us through what it was like for you as you began having conversations with people?
So certainly, and you are absolutely right, Alex. Letting people know what your interests are without pestering them. So I'm going to underscore the second part. It's extremely important, right? It's just saying, listen, I believe that I am now ready and equipped to add value in a corporate board. What's your advice? Can you help me? Would you be willing to go over my bio and my resume? That goes a long way. My story is actually, it came out, my first corporate board seat came about because of somebody who I served with in a non-for-profit organization. That person knew that I would be interested in exploring corporate board opportunities. He knew of my work, so in the non-for-profit, I added value as much as I could. I never just failed through meetings and that's when the opportunity came up. This person served on a corporate board. When the opening came up, he said, you should interview Anna. I served with her in a non-for-profit board of directors, and she is terrific. She has a great demeanor in the boardroom, and that's how I got the position. So don't ever think that people are not observing you. Now, imagine if I didn't show up for board meetings in the non-for-profit because I thought I could skip them, or if I was just sitting there doing email during the meetings, that opportunity would have never come up.
I like the way you described something earlier in a call of almost a progression of board experience for someone to be ready for a compensated board role. And there are lots of different ways you can go about it. Some people present internally to their company board. They might be working on nonprofit board seats, have advisory board seats, etc. Move up progression. You talked about, say, small private companies, complex private companies, and then what many people aspire to are the public companies. And I believe your first public company board is probably CME Group, and you had clearly had lots of different experience along the way. I imagine part of that just began to help you with your story about knowing how you would add value and the expertise that you would bring. Because we talk a lot on this show, you are not just a jack of all trades to get on a board. You are someone who has a subject matter expertise, and you're looking for the right cultural fit in a board who's looking for your sorts of background experience, who's a fit. Can you talk us through what that looked and felt like to you to find the right board opportunities? Because as we would joke about now, since you have, we were doing count 14 overall board position type roles that you're in now, you've probably become an expert at figuring out what's the right spot for you to add value. And as you look back on that, it might have been a bit harder. Can you give us a flavor about how you went about doing that and perhaps the advice you'd give to yourself today if you were beginning that process anew?
Of course. And let me start by saying that I saw an evolution on what good boards are looking for over the last 15 years, right? 15, 20 years ago, a generalist would be just fine, a jack of all trades, as you define. Now it's a completely different ballgame. Good boards develop directors' competence matrices. So what capabilities do we have now? Which ones do we have too much? Where do we have gaps? Given our future strategy, what are we going to need in the boardroom in terms of competences, skills, experiences, capabilities? And boards are looking for that. So that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is your personal brand. There's nothing more effective to help you to lose credibility when you try to portray that you're an expert in everything, right? Nobody is. So if somebody says, well, I'm an expert in supply chain, in digital, in human capital, in M&A, that is already tarnishing that person's credibility. So pick the 2 or 3 areas where you consider yourself a real experienced executive and expert, and then lead with that. Not always they are going to be what the board is looking for, but hey, that's life. But when you find a match, it's going to be great for both parties. And it might even have other things that you have done, but don't try to highlight more than 3 things. In my case, my 3 things, and P&L experience usually goes as a given, although I'm seeing some boards looking for chief digital officers or CISOs or some capabilities that were not necessarily sought after and are not necessarily P&L management capabilities. But in my case, when I interviewed with the CME group, it was very clear that, and I was very clear with them. I said I have 0 experience in trading or in exchanges or in futures, but here's what I bring to the table. Number 1 was my experience in technology. They were a very acquisitive company, and I had driven more than 12 acquisitions and had led the M&A group in a couple of consulting groups, and then my global experience. I don't know if I have global experience or technology experience, so fintech companies. So I led with that, right? Coincidentally, they had acquired an exchange in Brazil, which made me even more relevant. And so I knew what I was leading with, and then you can add on something that you have done. For example, I serve on an advisory board of a CPG company, and I have done a lot of consulting for CPG. So there's nothing wrong to add that in the conversation and to say, hey, listen, I've even consulted for some of your competitors, and here's what I know about the industry, so that they see you're not completely unknowledgeable about that industry. But the one thing I always say too, Alex, is that I have my 3 criteria for boards that I want to serve on very clear, and I think everybody should, because every conversation is a 2-way street. You're not just selling; you are also on your end evaluating if that's a good fit or not. And for me, my 3 questions for myself are, number 1, am I aligned with the mission of this company and with the values of this company? There are certain industries. I would not serve on the board of a tobacco company, for example. I have people in my family who died of lung cancer, and they smoked a lot, and it would be against my values. The second question is, can I truly add value to this organization and to this board? Because even if you belong to a diverse group, and I do, I'm a female Latina, you don't want to feel that you're in the room because of that only, right? And then the third question is, as I start to interview and talk with the other directors and the CEO, is really simple, is do I like these people? Because you're going to be spending lots of hours with them. You are going to be having lots of discussions and debates, and not always you're all going to agree on the same thing. So looking around and saying, are these people who I'm going to enjoy spending the entire day with and then going out for dinner, for example, or not? So those are my three questions. But I think that every person, as they start to have board opportunity conversations, should have their own criteria clear.
I like those questions a lot. I think that is gold dust that many of us can put to use immediately as we begin to know ourselves in the right organizations. And I do stress for my listeners, you don't take the first board seat you get offered, you take the right one, because that's when you're going to excel. And sort of like we talked about in your story, Anna, of you probably would have not gotten to say 10, 12, 14 currently, however we want to count it today, unless you'd done really well. You talked about showing up, being successful, being a good cultural fit. So I think that's something we can all apply today. But I'd also love your thoughts on onboarding. And I'm sure you've seen the whole gamut here from good, bad, and ugly. It's fascinating to me how many organizations spend a huge amount of time thinking about their regular employees, if I call it, making sure they have a good onboarding experience to be successful. Some boards do this well, others don't do anything about it at all, and everywhere in between. And I can never quite figure out what this is like. And I'm sure you've seen all sides of it. Clearly, onboarding is critical to getting a new director up and running to be as successful as quickly as possible. I'd love your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, I have to say that I have to confess that I've been extremely lucky in the sense that most boards I joined did a really good job onboarding people. Of course, that is just the tip of the iceberg, right? That's just an event. You will really get to know what the company is all about and the details. I say this a year for you to be really familiar with the company. But onboarding is crucial. Now, one thing, and I would say that whomever is interviewing with a board should ask the question, what is your onboarding process? Because that's going to tell you a lot about the company. Is it a throw the director in the water and see if he or she sinks or swims, or is there thought put into how we onboard directors so that they are more effective, faster, right? Now, in the absence of a formal or an effective onboarding process, use the people around you. So there are two things that I always do, and it may seem funny, but I like to build a good open relationship with the board liaison or the board secretary. And sometimes I go out for lunch with that person and I say, okay, tell me what I need to know to be an effective director here. Are there any do's and don'ts? Is there any chair in the boardroom that I should not sit on? And then the other thing I did at times informally and at times I did formally is to pick somebody who I will elect or ask to be my buddy, my mentor in the board. So sometimes it may be the person who first sponsored you if you were nominated or proposed by, you had an individual who was supporting you. And sometimes there was one case, this is kind of funny, the board, relatively large board with assigned seats. And it just so happened that the director who sat on my right was extreme experience, knew the company really well. And he started to volunteer when there was an acronym that I didn't know. He would whisper, and I said, you know what? You were just selected my guardian angel here. So can I ask you even the most stupid question? And to this day, and I said to him that it always gives me a lot of satisfaction when I ask people a question that you didn't know the answer for, to say, oh, I need to research that one. I don't know. And I say, oh my God, it's so good to know that you don't know everything. but I think that is as important as the formal onboarding process. And I'll make two additional comments. One is you are also accountable for your onboarding process. So everything that you can put your hands on and read about the industry, trends, and the company history, for example, is just so important. What can you know about the other directors? Go on LinkedIn and find out who they are, right? What their background is. You may discover more things in common than you know. And then the last thing is it never hurts, because I never see it as an explicit part of an onboarding process. So it never hurts, in addition to reading all the committee charters, super important, so go figure out where the committee charters are and read them, but also to have a conversation with the lead director, the board chair, or the CEO about expectations. Because I serve on board where we are expected to be more hands-on. I serve on boards where we are clearly not expected to be hands-on and to focus much more on the regulators, legislators, and all the bureaucratic part of the process. So that's where the onboarding is a very broad theme. If we start to talk about all the ways in which it actually happens, right?
So on another area I would love to get your comments on, because you've given so much insightful wisdom today for our audience, would be about chairing committees. So from someone who's been on so many different boards, and we can probably go back to your earlier days when you're thinking you landed your first major board and you're like, I really like this. I'd like to get more. And that's probably what many people listening to the show are thinking today. I would love to build a portfolio someday. There is a really important part of building out your experience as a board member, but also probably making yourself more attractive by having been a chair. That's a very different position from just being a member of a committee. And I know you feel very strongly being a chair is a good thing to do. I'd love if you would share some of your experience, what that's been like.
Yeah, and when people ask me, Alex, about what are the things you wish to do when you joined your first board that you know now, that's actually the top one. Is the importance of, at some point, taking the leap and put your name out there as a potential committee chair. And you're so right. It is abundantly different to serve in a committee versus chair a committee, because when you're chairing a committee, the bucket stops with you at the end of the day. So the level, I have to say that when you are a member of a committee, you prepare yourself, you read all the materials, you contribute in the discussion, and all that. But when you're chairing a committee, it's a completely different ballgame. If you're chairing the audit committee, your name and your signature are there, right, in all the auditing documents. If you're chairing the nominating, the nom and gov committee, you are responsible for shaping that board at the end of the day. And I say, if we were having a conversation about board diversity, the one thing that I noticed is that the most diverse boards have a diverse director chairing the non-gov committee. And then I chair a couple of comp committees, imagine the responsibility. You're setting the short term and the long term incentive plans for the CEO and for their direct reports. You are doing performance evaluation. There's nothing more serious than that. So I would say that sharing a committee is a privilege and an honor, and you have to know when you're truly ready to do it. But it should be, again, if you think about this evolution of responsibilities, this board career evolution, that should be the next step after you become an experienced director.
Well, Anna, we've talked a lot about your journey today, and much of that guidance has been appropriate for our audience to think about how they bring into their own selves and take on their journey. I'd love if, for a final question, if you could look into your crystal ball, because a lot has changed during the pandemic about how boards work. We've joked it's given you more time since you're doing less travel to be on more boards. Some of these lessons will stick. Some things will go back to the way they were before. I would love if you say, look down the line, say another year or so, a couple of years out, whatever it might be, and think, what are we going to take away as boards from what we've learned during this experience to be different?
Couple of things. The first one is that we have to be much, much more proactive and much more effective at anticipating potential changes in the marketplace, right? We had the world financial crisis in 2008, and oh man, boards were not ready for that. Now we have the pandemic, and boards were not ready for that. How many times we have had succession crises in companies, and sometimes in giant companies like Coca-Cola or McDonald's, and the boards were not ready for that. And we have technology disruptions, and not necessarily boards are ready for that. So I think that there is a much heightened awareness of, hey, we have to be ahead of the game. We have to be looking at trends. We have to be prepared. How many cyber security disasters we had in the last few years, and that exposed multi-billion-dollar companies out there. So I think that that's one. The second one that we're going to see is boards. I think the light bulb is going on for, hey, we don't need to be face-to-face. We don't need to be in person every time we get together. In fact, I will dare to guess that in most boards I serve, the new normal is going to be a 50-50. If that much, it's going to be half of the meetings in person and half of the meetings virtually, which actually increases your ability to recruit more diverse directors, right? Because it's complicated to recruit people all over the world if you have to add a day and a half to every meeting that these individuals come to, and quite frankly, it becomes expensive as well. And then I think that the third thing that we're going to see moving forward, because of the incredible movement that's being spearheaded by customers, by employees, by legislators, regulators, proxy advisory firms, we are going to see more diverse boards. As you know, I'm a director in the board of the Latino Corporate Directors Association. I'm a director on the board of the Women Business Collaborative, and I actually lead the board diversity initiative there. And I think we have one in a lifetime opportunity now to truly increase diversity in boards in a very intentional way. So I think those are going to be the three changes that we're going to see moving forward.
Well, I definitely agree that we will see more change as the only constant in life, and I don't want to waste a crisis. So I think there are some good things that can come out of this in terms of how boards are valuing themselves and preparing for whatever might come down the road, because we do know something else will be coming down the road. So Anna, we were delighted to have you on the show today. Thank you for sharing your insights and helping all of us to be boardroom bound. That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Anna Dutra. It's so much fun talking to someone who's had so much varied board experience and can translate across from being a sitting executive over into the boardroom when she's sitting on 8 current boards, plus 2 more advisory boards and 4 nonprofits on top of that. She's kind of been there and done it all. She's seen it, she understands it, including multiple public company board roles. So many nuggets of wisdom today. Now remember, if you head over to podcast.gordon.edu, you will find links to all of today's resources. Please know that the Boardroom Bound team and I are so proud to be your go-to podcast for all things that connect, prepare, and empower you to land a board seat. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any of the high-quality content that we're bringing to you every Wednesday. Thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.